show your T1three spirit, we have merch. So you can get your very own PrimeTime Travvy T shirt, Bad Guys Spoken hoodie, Hi-Fi mic mug, Book It bandana, or even a That's a Banger pillowcase. You can find it all at www.T1threemedia.com. We are live. What's up, guys? Welcome to the 5th episode of Primetime with Travvy T. I, of course, am your host, Primetime Travvy T himself, and today I'm joined by founders of Auroras Blossoms, Cendrine Marrouat, and David Ellis. Did I say your name right? Did I get that?
Perfect.
Awesome. So thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you guys doing today?
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, very good.
Very, very
Glad
well.
to hear it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Auroras Blossoms is a poetry journal, correct?
Oh, it's a lot of things.
Okay. Yeah, so tell me about that.
It started as a poetry journal first.
Okay.
But then because of the success of the platform, David and I just decided to go all in because it was fantastic. When we created the journal, we really wanted to prove one thing, that the world needed positive and inspirational poetry. And then when we saw the success of the platform, we're like, oh yeah, we want to add more ad forms. We want to help, we want to give people a platform where they can get publishing credits, and the credentials don't matter. We do not care about how big they are. If their list of publications or credits are as long as my arm, we didn't care about that. We really wanted to prove the world that what we need right now is positive and inspirational poetry. And then, we realized that poetry is not everything, that there were other art forms that we could use to make the world a better place in our own way. So we created our own poetry form, the Kind Coup. We created our art movement, Poartmo. We created journals and guides and workbooks for authors and writers. So what was initially supposed to be just a poetry journal turned into something much, much bigger. And now we are working on our second magazine, which is Auroras Blossoms Creative Arts Journal. And we also have a third magazine, which is focused exclusively on photography. So the Creative Arts Journal is focused on 6-word stories, drawings, paintings, essays, flash fiction, and short stories. That's what it is. So we're currently working on issue 1.
Awesome. That's really exciting. You've got a lot going on. So tell me how you guys met and what made you feel like you needed to, I mean, you already kind of said it, what you needed to start it. What you needed to work together to start Auroras Blossoms was the positivity. But tell me how you guys met and how you came up with this idea.
I can cover that one. Basically, I believe that me and Cendrine actually interviewed each other. We do interviews on our blogs, our respective blogs and websites. And I've interviewed over about a couple of hundred authors over my sort of time interviewing people. And one of the authors that cropped up was Cendrine, because she was promoting her poetry at the time. And I work as a photographer. And because my dad is an artist and I'm a writer and an influential sort of person in that sort of way, all of these different elements, I think what gelled us all together, they kind of sort of conspired to make us think, what can we do to be inspirational to people? We were talking about being inspirational together, me and Cendrine, before COVID came to us. I believe it was like mid 2019. We were kind of lamenting about the lack of positivity or inspirational poetry in journals per se. And we both wondered, well, we thought that'd be a great idea to just say, why don't we form a journal ourselves? Because we'd interviewed each other and because we kept in touch with each other, we said, why don't we try to spread more positivity? Because both of us positive poets, we've both released collections that celebrate positivity, And that's the kind of poetry that we love to write. And then we were like, well, why don't we try to bring more people to either write that kind of poetry or promote more people that write that kind of poetry? And that's when we formed the idea of the journal. And then from the journal, it's kind of just our relationship and our business partnership has evolved from that point to where it's become a platform to say, well, we want to promote positivity in any way we can. And that's why it's evolved onto a creative journal, anthologies, workbooks to help people to write poetry, to create art, to provide prompts and other creative things. And it's just because we're two very driven, creative individuals that we realised that together we could do so much more as a partnership than we could do on our own. We were both doing very, very well on our own with our respective careers, and we thought, but we could be so much stronger together if we teamed up and took on the world as a tour de force together, and try to promote our idea of positivity to any level that we could achieve. We just didn't feel like it was on our own. We were stronger if we could unify our voice and promote each other as well, because we promote each other's individual things as well. It's not just about Auroras and Blossoms on its own. We do help promote each other's individual poetry collections and stories. And I write comedy, parodies, and other sorts of things. Cendrine's written a play. She's done all kinds of things. I promote photography, all sorts of things that we try to promote for each other. And that's how we've had such a strong foundation, I think, for our business relationship together, because we're driven in the same direction, I think, and we clearly want to see something come about of what we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Okay, that's a bigger response than I am used to getting on just the initial. I like it. I like that you guys are going in depth with everything. I love that. So your tagline is where positive art and inspiration meet. Can one of you explain what exactly that means? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but that way we get the in-depth response from the creators.
Oh, I don't know if it's gonna be an in-depth response, but
yeah,
you know what David said before is sums it up really. I think for us, at least for me, um, art that is not inspirational or positive, I wouldn't say it's not really art, because there's art is art, but it just art doesn't inspire you to take action or to do something positive, that changes the status quo in a way that helps people think differently. That's what I talk about. That's what I mean when I talk about art. So that's really what the slogan stands for. It's about making the world a better place, one piece of art at a time. And as I said before, it doesn't matter what your credentials are. It doesn't matter how big you are in the art world. What we're looking for is an artist who is really interested in changing the world, even in a small way, through their art. So that would be my answer. Maybe David has something better to say.
Well, I think that our slogan evolved from initially when we were just focused on poetry, because the reason we focused initially on poetry was because we didn't know that we were going to be delving into lots of other different forms like stories, flash fiction, essays, art itself, drawings, paintings, and photography. But I think so initially we were kind of just like, it's where positive poetry sort of takes place. And then we were just like, well, why restrict ourselves? We've all been about kind of, is there any way we can evolve this and grow this bigger? And that's why we ended up saying where positivity in art meets, because art to us was such a kind of broad word. It didn't have to just encompass poetry, just encompasses poetry, written poetry. You could have maybe prose poetry, but it's very kind of sort of, in my opinion, it's not narrow-minded. It's just what we specialised in. And then we thought, but why don't we try to expand ourselves? Because we're ruling out a huge portion of the writing community and artistic community if we just focus on poetry, because you've got people that write short 6-word stories, so they're like little mini haiku poems, but you've got people that write flash fiction and they can write inspirational stories. You can have people that write short stories that are inspirational. You've got people that can do drawings that, as Cendrine said, will inspire people to either pick up a pen or paper and do their own art. And photography itself, I think photography is a difficult one, but again, you can still capture beautiful imagery, and then we can then say, well, that's positive in its own way. And we're not against negative art. We understand how cathartic it can be to people, but our kind of sort of attitude is like, the reason we want everything to be positive is because we feel people need it, I think, to make themselves feel better about themselves, especially now and in the time we are. It's a terrible year that we've had this year. Is just like, it seems ironic that we started it well before all this sort of kicked off, and now we just feel like everybody's like they want to turn to something to make them feel positive, to help them through what's going on at the moment, the turmoil that we're having in the world at the moment across lots of different kind of themes and areas. And that's why we ended up saying, look, let's use the word art rather than just say poetry or just even writing, because it's all encompassing. And usually creative people are doing lots of other things. Cendrine does photography as well as artwork, so as well as poetry. And I can't draw to save my life, but so my father does art, and I've written stories and poetry. I've often desired to evolve to other things like script writing or other things. And music, I did actually make a couple of albums years ago, but I never really kind of took that any further. But I think with creative individuals, I think that we're not just we're not just fit in one particular box. So we might write poetry, but we could also write stories. We could also write music. We could also make music. We could perhaps direct films, or do any number of things. We could take pictures and do photography. We can draw and paint and stuff. So that's why we wanted to try to say, let's stop being so narrowly focused. Because that suits us in terms of what we were specialising in. But then we realised we could, create a lot more of a positivity platform if we focus more on art in general, and that could even extend to all sorts of things. It could be theatre or arts and crafts, pottery, and all sorts of anything you can think of that has got an artistic kind of sort of slant. If it's got something positive to do with it, or it creates joy. When you look at it, it could be because of how beautiful or inspirational it is. Then that's what would align with what we're trying to achieve between the two of us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's really why, because in a magazine you can put so much art forms, or so many art forms. So that's why we wanted to open the art forms to, as you said, pottery and stuff like that. So that's why we created POARTMO, which stands for Positive Art Month, which is in June, and Positive Art Moves the rest of the year. So this is an artistic movement dedicated to inspiration and positivity. So it's open to all art forms, artists at all levels in their career, amateurs, hobbyists, professionals, and they're invited to create all year long and positive and inspirational art. It doesn't matter what they do.
Okay. What was the inspiration to make it a month, and then make it into a whole movement? Aside from obviously you want to spread positivity through art, but I mean, when I was reading through your press kit, there was a few other acronyms, I guess is what you would call them, for it. So can you explain what those are and how those inspired you to take?
So we were inspired by NaPoWriMo, National Poetry Writing Month, and NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. So we wanted to create something a little similar, but not limited to one art form. So we really wanted to open horizons and allow everyone to be able to create art, no matter who they are. So that's really what it is. So POARTMO was initially supposed to be a June movement. That's all, to celebrate 1 month, and then we were like, maybe we can make it all year long, because you don't just need 1 month to be creative. It should be positivity, inspiration should be spread around all year. You don't need just 1 month. So that's it.
Okay. That was the problem that I found with National Poetry Writing Month, is that once the month is gone, people tend to forget about it, and then everybody calms down and they don't really bother with it until the following year. And the same goes for National Novel Writing Month, but I understand why they do it with that, because it's very kind of pressurized and stressful to try and write a novel in a month, whereas it's still writing a poem a day in the National Poetry Writing Month. That can be stressful, because unless you actually go in there with a particular scheme or plan, I like actually going in there kind of on the fly and then trying to come up with something every day. But life gets in the way, and it can just get so stressful. You tend to find that you'll do the month, you'll get no sleep, and then at the end of it, you'll immediately become ill because your body's just been kind of just fighting to get through it, and then as soon as you finished everything, you just like, oh, I'm relieved now, and then all of a sudden the reality of the world comes crashing back in on you. And it used to happen to me. I used to when I used to take it that seriously, I would be beavering away. I'd spend hours on these poems, and in the end, you just try to you could just write short haikus and things. And but I like people that make the effort to do it. It's like it's no good just sort of cranking out some funny little line, 2 or 3 lines. Cendrine works very hard on her poetry so that every single line counts and means something. And but talking about National Poetry Writing Month and National Novel Writing Month, it's just because they were just a month, and then people just forget about them. I thought, well, and the reason we say positive art moves is that art moves people. So the joke was like, well, it's moving people, but it moves because it's moving around the entire year rather than just being in June. So that's why we wanted to do that. We didn't want to have a kind of sort of. It's all about our philosophy of saying, how can we be more flexible to accommodate more people? Because if it was just June, then we'd go through June and then we'd be like, well, okay, we could just put it to bed and we wouldn't worry about it. But I don't feel like that would be fair to people that suddenly find out about it, because it's the first time we haven't seen anyone else, as far as we're concerned. We haven't seen anyone else doing anything similar. And we thought, well, if we debut this and then people suddenly come to it and go, hang on a minute, I've missed it. I've got to wait another year until we can do this again. And I just feel like that's very restrictive in that sort of sense. So we've tried to say, look, the main focus is June, but you can still participate because we want to create a movement that we want to create a movement that inspires people to actually do that and say, well, we have prompts on our website. So with our new poetry form that we created, we have a prompt every couple of weeks that we give people to try our new poetry form. And we also have a positive art month or positive art moves prompt. We've done about 8 of those so far now, where we try and inspire people and say, think of any kind of art that you can do, and we try and apply that to any kind of art. So we're there to try and say, look, if we can convince people to create things, then they might submit to our journals. So we have then content for our journals as well. So it's a win-win for us both. We try to promote positive artwork and get people to create that, and then we then benefit if they then decide to submit that artwork to us, and we do want to publish it.
Okay, awesome. So I like a couple of things I'm noticing in this whole grand scheme of things is how you guys aren't wanting to be boxed in, which is something I can relate with being an artist, being a creator. People ask me all the time, like, well, what do you call, what are you? I am a creator. That's it. I'm not anything else. I'm not a poet or a podcast host or a musician or an actor or a writer. I'm a creator. I'm all of these things put together. So as one thing that stood out to me when I was reading through your press kit and talking to you guys and everything was, you made sure to put in your press kit that a 13 to 16-year-old can contribute to your guys' work. So to follow up on that, why was it important for you to specify their age, to specify the young artists? That's something that interests me. So what made you guys decide that was necessary to specify?
Our platform is family friendly, fully family friendly. So we want people of all ages, of course, from a certain age, of course, as many people as possible can read our magazines, because there's no sweat words, there's no erotica, there's no politics. So, and even if it's a topic that is hard to talk about, for example, that could be suicide, cancer, the pieces that we publish have to have a lesson that people can take away with them, and that can create a conversation even between the kids and the family and the parents. That's really the point of the platform. And why 13 and 16 years old? Because we want creatives, and you say we are creatives, and I fully agree with you. We want creatives as young as 13 years old to be able to be in the magazine, to have publishing credits, because I believe that teenagers have so many great things to teach adults, especially in this day and age. Well, know what I'm referring to. So it's very important to welcome those young creatives as well, and not limit their reach. Don't say, you have to be a certain type, and why 13, 16? Because we have to have the agreement from the parents or their guardians before we can publish them. That's part of the rules that we have. We cannot publish, someone who is under 16 years old without the agreement from their parents. And the same thing goes for the photography or the art. If it depicts a kid who is recognizable in an image, the artist has to have permission from the family or the person concerned. So that's why 13, 16-year-old.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that the reason we selected that age, I mean, there was a couple of reasons. Another one was that if you go any younger than 13, I think it causes problems when you have to interact with the parents and the child as well. So I think they're saying that 13 and above is when you can publish someone, like Cendrine said, as long as you get the permission from the parent and the guardian. So I think that we couldn't go any lower than 13. But I think it's, if someone we're talking about someone's life experience. If you go too far down, then you might end up having someone that just really doesn't have the experience. They're a little bit too young to have actually practiced art, and so you want someone that's probably had a couple of years worth of practice before they can do that, because they might come up with something wonderful. But also we wanted to open things up, because you said about us not being boxed in. We wanted to say, well, why are we just simply focusing on adults? Because we saw the potential. We've been speaking to a lot of people about including the younger generation, and they were very excited about it. We found like some schools that were interested. They've submitted, so they've told some of the parents about it, and we've had some submissions from children via their parents and grandparents, because they realise that it's an educational resource. We're offering up something where people will, say, okay, why don't they get their children to create based on maybe some themes that we've produced, or even just an inspirational thing? Because I think it's, we don't, because we're family friendly, we don't want any politics or swear words or anything like that. So we're ideally situated to be able to accept artwork from children. And I think that's a wonderful message to put out to them as well, to say, as I said before about the times that we're in, and turning to more inspirational creative sources. I think that's a wonderful message to give to children, to say, why don't you create something inspirational that will be inspirational to your classmates, and maybe even to your own career, because if they get published at such an early age, then that might inspire them to actually take up a career in art, or some other kind of similar kind of venue. Okay,
awesome. One of the things that I liked about the 13 to 16-year-old thing is it just feels like it gives young artists a chance to make realistic goals. I mean, they're looking into your guys' publications and magazines and looking at this like, oh, I really want to be a part of that. It makes it realistic that you can do that. It might not be realistic that for a 13-year-old to say, oh, I want to be the biggest rock star in the world, or I want to be this, whatever it is. And it's when I say not realistic, I mean maybe not realistic in that moment. But it could be realistic in that moment for them to translate those song lyrics that they have into a poem to be published, or take a picture with their camera and get it published, like whatever it is. So that I was really I was inspired by that, to be honest, with it, that there is someone out there that's actively trying to, I don't want to say recruit, but mold and nurture young creatives. That was a big thing for me. So
it's funny you mentioned that, Travvy, because with the song lyrics thing, that's how I started out. Actually, I was actually writing song lyrics, and that's how I started out as a poet, because I was writing, I was doing spoofs of songs. I had tunes in my head of popular songs, and then I was a big fan of Weird Al Yankovic and a lot of other kind of sort of spoof people. but I was writing my own songs, and I realised that I had too many words for the song structures. It was just like I was trying to build hooks when there weren't kind of like it was more kind of verbose with all the verses that I was doing, and I found I had more verses than choruses and repeating lines. And it's at that point that I had people say to me, "Oh, this sounds like poetry without music," and I just went, "Really? That's what it is."
Yeah.
So I did actually create some music. I did create a couple of albums, and they were a lot more scaled down in terms of the lyricism and the amount of lyrics that were in there. But that's how I started, So as you say, if you've got someone that's interested in music, it's a very good kind of sort of thing that with our poetry prompts. A lot of the time, we do tell people to look at music, to listen to the song, and say, why don't you take some inspiration from the song and take some words from the song and make your own poetry from that. So that's why I wanted to interrupt and mention about that, because that's how I started off as an artist. That was how I say I'm 40 now, but 20 years ago, I was trying to make my own music and trying to write my own songs. And then I just had about 200 pages of these lyrics that just didn't really go anywhere. And then I kind of sort of like started to go through them all. And, there was a lot of kind of sort of, funnily, there was some negativity in there as well. Maybe it's because when I was growing up at that sort of age.
Yeah.
And it's funny how I've become someone that's so positive now as I've got older, because I suppose normally you find that people go around the other way. They start off positive and then they become negative as they get older. Whereas I've become totally the opposite direction. But yeah, that's why I wanted to focus on that, because that's how I became a poet, because I needed somewhere. I started a blog and a website a few years ago. So I didn't start writing poetry immediately. It was just writing those spoof song lyrics, and that's what it evolved into. So this is why we want to get people to create, because they might start doing some art and then find actually that the art that they're making, they're just actually that they'd rather write, or vice versa. They might be writing and thinking, hang on a minute, actually I want to dabble in photography or drawing or other kind of sort of mediums. I think we're just trying to start the creative seed in someone, and then give them the creative bug, and then get them to say, well, where am I going to take this in the future? Because it might be years down the line you realize that you want to take it in completely different directions.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I have a similar background. I'd write music and lyrics, and that's kind of what made me want to start. I'm not going to say I'm a poet, but I would look into poetry and write into poetry. It's one of my goals is to write a book of poetry myself and publish that. That's down the line. That's not a current thing that I'm working on, but it is a goal that I have. It's a goal to get me as author credits and stuff like that. But also kind of the same thing is I've always been super interested in like movies and TV and stuff like that. And I always thought like my best work on that would be the writing side or the directing side, stuff like that. I got the opportunity that I'm currently acting in a film as my first time acting ever. And I have completely fallen in love with acting, which is something that I never thought I was going to be not just be able to do, but not even want to do. Like it was never my thought process. I want to be an actor. But yeah, it's crazy how, like what you were saying, when you start doing one thing and then it leads to another thing, and then that leads to another thing. And that's why I like that you guys aren't boxed in. And like I was saying, we're creatives. We're not anything else. It's hard to say you're one thing or the other. So before you guys, when you're in the planning process of this and trying to get everything together and get through it, before you were able to publish that first issue, were you guys ever what were the complications and the struggles that you had?
David and I get along so well. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
We get along extremely well. So we are in the same frame of mind when it comes to marketing, preparing, laying down everything. So before announcing, our first call for submissions for the Poetry Journal, we had laid down everything, the strategy, the plans, the ideas. I'm not saying that everything worked. Right. But many of the ideas we implemented worked because we both agreed before launching anything. And we have so much experience in marketing. And I used to work as a social media coach. I worked in marketing. I've marketed all my books and helped other people do it. I've worked with small businesses and so on and so forth. So we had laid down, different scenarios that we wanted to achieve. Really, that's what it was. So it's I think that we were so ready, so well organized, and so prepared that, at least for me, I didn't feel like there was any challenge that we can achieve or anything. And I think we also set up some small achievable goals, which is the right thing to do when you start a project like ours. So we built slowly, surely, but with you know um a level of commitment. We knew we would be in the long run. We knew we would be for the long run for us. So for me, it wasn't very, very challenging because we were really well prepared and really well organized.
Absolutely. David?
Yeah, I mean, I think because we laid all that groundwork, it did make things easy initially. I think we've had some the odd teething trouble. I think because sometimes when people submit, they try to make up their own rules. We try to make things simpler for people, and we try to understand where people are coming from. We're getting very good at reading submission forms in terms of we can tell
Yeah.
more or less whether a submission is going to be good or not from the form, and it's kind of like an art and the science, really. But if someone tries to pull the wool over our eyes when it comes to being inspirational, if they've written a poem and then they try to then make up some reason why it's inspirational, we can more or less see it from the comment that they made. We deliberately put that question in there because we want to people to explain to us why other people might find things inspirational. And ultimately, some people tend to confuse nostalgia. They'll talk about all the happiness of having a child and things, and that can be turned into something inspirational. But we want the relatability to people. We want a message that kind of finishes on something positive. We've said people can come along with negative subjects and turn them into a positive side of things. But ultimately, we have found that we've had to tweak our guidelines every so often when somebody tries to pull a fast one, and they'll do something that we just think, oh, we didn't think about that. And every time we're going to do it, we just say, I think we fixed it. I think we fixed the problem. There's not going to be any more problems now. And then someone will come along and they'll find another way to try and break our form, and it'll just be like, hang on. Surely the person can't be that dumb that they've going to have done that. I know that sounds mean to sort of say that, but it's weird because we've got people that are very, very intelligent and creative when it comes to writing their poetry and and creating their art. But when it comes to just sort of like simple instructions, just like saying, well, what is this, and where you're coming from it, they just don't have a clue. And it's sad. We want to educate people more. This is why we've tried to write our guidebooks and our workbooks on how to promote yourself as a poet, how to market yourself as a poet, how to use prompts and things, because we feel like there's a lot of people that need some kind of education when it comes to even writing a simple bio. For example, is that sometimes the editing that we've had to do when we've had to publish some people, we just go, what a lovely piece of art. I mean, it's like, oh my God, the bio is just terrible. Oh, yeah. It's either poorly worded or it's War and Peace, of about 5,000 words. And, we don't want to reject people because of that. We just have to, and those are the problems I think that we've had. So I don't feel like we had a lot of problems initially when we were setting up. I think as it's evolved, I think that, and I wouldn't say that we have lots of problems. We get lots of decent submissions, but unfortunately, we do get some bad ones as well. And people don't really do themselves any favors. We've had people being rude. We've had to put that into our guidelines and saying, if you're going to be rude, then that's the end of you. Is that we offer a free route to our journal, but we have to. People don't seem to take into account that our time is precious. That we're promoting and marketing them, we're editing their work, we're creating covers and publishing the journal, we're promoting the journal. All they've had to do is write one poem and then submit it to us. And okay, if they feel that it's that difficult with the submission process to fill in the form as well, but from their point of view, they don't have to do anything else. And we have, and the reason I bring it up that we have a free submission option is because we were criticised that we wanted to take a very small fee to look at people's sort of work, and you just think, well, why shouldn't we get some kind of? I used to do a lot of free author interviews, and I don't do that anymore now. I do a bartering system where I say people have got to buy some of my books in order to get that interview, because my time is precious now. It's focused on primarily on Auroras and Blossoms, and that's what we found. As I say, so bringing up again, it's just how this thing's evolved. And how people will try to manipulate the situation. They'll try to just be like, well, I'm not being paid as an artist. therefore they almost look down on us in that sort of respect. But I feel like you should respect editors and publishers, and you are taking one piece of art or writing that you've done, and if you want to be promoted and be taken seriously by people, because a lot of people now, in terms of if they self-publish their own poetry book, if you try to then market that anywhere else, the first thing that you're asked is, where else were you published? And if you haven't published anywhere else and you just published your book, but you've been rude to a lot of other journals because they didn't take you seriously, because you didn't take the process seriously, then that's the trouble that we've had. It's one of those things where, as I say, the vast majority of people have been lovely. They've been wonderful. They've been very positive about their stuff. But we do get some difficult people, and but then what's funny is that those people help us to grow even stronger, because we can then put that information into the platform, and then hopefully we can avoid those kind of sort of people. I said there's always someone that comes along that tries to break something in some way, and then we're there trying to fix it and try to tinker with it and try and alter it so that it's better for everyone in the future. But we've had some people turn around to us and say that our platform was too wordy and it's too difficult to submit. And it's just like, no, it isn't. It's just half a dozen questions that are very relevant to the person that's submitting. And I think people, we don't want people to be lazy. We just think, okay, you've got to put a little bit of effort in to submit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But and the thing is that the people that do put that effort in, they're the ones that are going to be rewarded. And we couldn't understand why with journals, why a lot of editors were rude, because Cendrine and myself have submitted to journals and we haven't got anywhere. But I can understand why they carry on like that, because we get a lot of silly submissions where people just aren't taking it seriously, and this is why 99% of the work is rejected in journals. I imagine because we're very specific. We want inspirational art, which helps us because we can reject things that aren't inspirational. But I feel sorry for a lot of journals that come along saying we'll take anything, and pretty much everybody to send anything in the hope that they're going to get it through.
Yeah.
And we find a lot of people don't proofread their stuff, so that goes in the bin because of that. And we have made some exceptions, but then that has meant that we've got to put a lot of our effort in, and it's very cheeky, So as I say, it's one of those things where I always would suggest that whatever you do, go in with it, do a lot of research and have a strong foundation. Try and think of all the possibilities and scenarios, and you will still encounter things that you didn't think about. But Cendrine and myself bounce ideas off each other, and we say, what about this? What about that? And that's how we evolved the platform, because we come up with about 20 different things to begin with. And we went and said we wanted to sort of try this and try that in terms of the submission process.
Yeah.
And then from that point, that's when we went and we added a couple of minor sort of things. But that's why I feel like our platform is so strong, and why it's evolving into other journals and magazines, because, as I said, we didn't want to stick with just poetry. So we just copied the process. The process became so strong, it became a template. And also we've had such phenomenal submissions because I've been putting us on platforms for our poetry. I'm rolling out the process for our creative journal and the photography magazine as well, because I'm going to the places where people want to submit, because we found that we were trying to chase individuals at one point who we liked, and they were just brushing us off. They were just like, yeah, we're going to do something, and they didn't. So I would always advocate that, try and go after the bigger kind of sort of fish as well. Don't limit yourself to going after small little things. You've got to think big if you want to. We want to stay around basically forever with our journals, and we're worried about people running out of kind of money or creativity or even time, because they've got to think about their other commitments. So we wanted to try and automate a lot of the process as possible, and by submitting ourselves to platforms, by making our platform itself very robust and covering every eventuality we could think of and then some. That's how we, so we still have a lot of work to do, but we've taken out 90% of the pain because of all of the great background and foundation that we put in place in the first place.
Absolutely. Okay. Awesome. So tell me about Poetry Really Matters.
Oh, Poetry Really Matters. We changed the name, actually.
Okay.
We were on a break, so now it's called the Poartmo Show, to actually reflect the changes we've gone through over the last 12 months. Issue 5 of our poetry journal which was released on October 1st, is actually marks the first year, the first year of our platform. So we're very excited.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So now, Poetry Really Matters used to be a show only focused on poetry. We read some poems. We talked about poetry-related topics and so on and so forth. So we announced a few things related to the Poetry Journal. But then, since we started accepting more art forms, it didn't really make sense that we would just focus on poetry. So PoArtMo has taken off on its own, because our second anthology, the PoArtMo anthology, was very, very successful and is available for pre-orders now. So we thought that it would make sense just to rename the show PoArtMo. So we were on a break for a few months because we were very, very busy. We're starting again in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So basically, the goal of the show is to have relaxed conversations about inspirational and positive art, and also sharing some of the news about our platform as well. So that's basically what the show is all about.
Okay. David, did you have anything to add to that, or did she do a good job?
She did an excellent job. I'm trying desperately to try and think of something. I mean, we read out our poetry as well, so that's another thing that we like to do.
Okay.
Because it gives us an opportunity to perform our poetry to a live studio audience. Even though we have lots of people actually watching it. We do it through like what you're doing through StreamYard now. We do the whole kind of sort of thing, and we tend to find that people watch it way after the actual sort of time. Is that when you try and catch people in a live event, a lot of people are like, "Nah, I'll watch it later." I haven't got time to actually do everything that I'm doing now. It's our busy times that we live in, but I mean, that's one of the aspects that we tend to do. We tend to like to do in the show. I think we switched up a little bit one time. I think, did I read some of your poetry, Cendrine, and you went and read my one? So we just thought, rather than we just thought it'd be an interesting thing to do, because sometimes we would select inspirational poetry that we would find elsewhere. And then when we started writing the Kainku poetry, we thought, well, okay, this would actually be funny to read it out ourselves and perform it ourselves. And then we thought, why don't we switch it up and get the person that's unfamiliar with the poem to perform it, and vice versa. And so it's just keeping things sort of fresh and funny and interesting for us. I wouldn't say they're really funny, really. It's just a bit more inspirational. Because I tend to have little asides myself. I do write comedy poetry, but I focus more on romantic and inspirational poetry, so that's the kind of sort of thing that we do in the show. We're trying not to, again, when we talk about boxing ourselves in, we have our own kind of like little side sort of things that we do, and one of which, as I say, is that I'm heavily focusing on a lot of romantic poetry at the moment, because I belong to a romantic poetry group. But I'm diverging. What I mean is that I won't let that sort of creep into. Sometimes some of that creeps into what I write and what I do with Auroras and Blossoms. But it's never kind of again, it's PG friendly, so I always keep it. There's no kind of sort of dirty words or erotica or that kind of sort of stuff. And if I do anything like that, then that's on my kind of career as David Ellis, not the co-founder of Auroras and Blossoms. We try to keep that sort of separate. So we might, in the show, we might actually promote if we've got any other books coming out as well. But because Cendrine and I have done a lot of collaborations together, most of it has been the anthologies and the workbooks, and our most recent book of Kainku and Sixku that we wrote together as well.
So go ahead. Let's just jump right into that. What, you guys are not just creators or creatives. You are creating of art. You're creating art forms as well. So explain what Kainku and Sixku are.
Okay, I'll start with my poetry form, the Sisku. So it's spelled Sixku, but I pronounce it Sisku because I'm French and I just can, do whatever I want.
Okay.
Poetic license. So I'm a huge fan of the haiku, the Japanese poetry form. I think it's the most beautiful poetry form in the world. Very concise. It forces you to say so much in such a few words, which is the essence of good poetry, of good writing in general. Don't say too much, show more, right? That's what we say. So the Sisku pays homage to my love for the haiku and photography, since I'm a photographer. So basically the sisku is a mixture between both. So it's 6 words. It's not syllables, it's just 6 words in 3 lines. And each line has to have a different idea, with the third line, like in a haiku, having a twist or a surprise. And it must be inspired by a photography. So if you write a sisku, you must show me your photo at the same time, what inspired it. So that's basically what the sisku is. And the kainku is a poetry form that David and I created this year. And we wanted to pay homage to our loves for haiku on my end and found poetry for David. And David can tell you more about what found poetry is. So the Japanese poetry form side of it is basically the syllables. So it's a 7-line poem. 7 5 7 5 7. I think I said too much. So either you start with 7 syllables or you start with 5 syllables, and you have to use 7 words from a piece of writing that you find somewhere, a poem, a book, lyrics, and so on and so forth. And each word must be used in the order you found them. And each line must have this specific word in order. So, for example, line 1 starts with word 1, line 2 ends with word 2, and so on and so forth until the 7th line. Like haikus, the kainku, the punctuation and the titles are optional, but the poems, the kainkus, must be positive. So the goal of the kainku, kindness, is to spread kindness through poetry. That's really the goal, being positive and inspirational. So the piece of writing that you choose to take the words from may be negative, but you have to turn your kainku into something positive that can be read by any person at any age.
Okay, awesome. David?
Yeah, I mean, the way we found the potential for the kainku is that at one point I went and wrote a found poem, Bukowski poem. I think it's just So You Want to Be a Writer. And Bukowski's poetry is very negative. And all I did with that one was that I went and took out all of the don't do this, don't do that. And I took out the don'ts, and then it became a very positive poem. And I thought when we were trying to, Sandrine and I were thinking, well, we saw that she'd created the Sisku. And we said, well, why don't we try and take the elements of what we're doing at the moment and see whether we can combine them to create our own form. So Cendrine is very much focused on the haiku form, and I have been writing found poetry for the last, say, several months, maybe even year. I wrote an entire collection of found poems based on Edgar Allan Poe, which I'm promoting for Halloween. I've done a found poetry collection for Shakespeare's sonnets, the first 50. I want to write another 2 more based on the other, because you've got 150 sonnets, so I'd make 3 books out of that. And for the New Romantics group, I do a lot of blackout poetry and virtual magnetic poetry where I find the words. And so what happens is that you might take a text of, say you take a page from a novel, you would then come along and I tend to take the words the way they fall. So I would take that page and then I would cut out words that I don't want and just focus on the words that interest me. And I'm trying to build something out of that. And it can be interesting because you don't know what you're going to come up with until you actually start creating the art itself. I tend to find that a lot of the time, if you do start with a positive piece, there'll be a lot of positive words in there, which makes it easier to write something like a kainku or a positive piece of poetry. But I'm at the level where I can take any kind of sort of piece of writing and more or less I will try and put something in that's either I will build something that's either romantic or inspirational or both. Because I've been doing it for so long, I can just sort of basically see the kind of sort of words shine out to me. So I'll say, okay, these are the ones that I'm going to pick. This is the way I'm going to do it. And that's what I've been specializing in. And what I found actually kind of like very exciting and also a little bit frightening is that I feel like that's actually given me infinite inspiration, because I've always been kind of going through life trying to think about what would inspire me the most and give me, a lot of people talk about writer's block and thinking, where do I get my next ideas from? I'm actually scared that I won't have enough years left in my life to get through all of the different ideas that I've got for found poetry. And, I'm just focusing on individual poems from classic people years ago, but you can do it for modern poetry, for modern people. I've done some of that, but you can look at plays, you can look at scripts, you can look at songs. There's just a vast amount of stuff. And I'm always worried that when I write my found poetry as well, that other people are going to do something similar. But I found I do have a very distinct style. Cendrine has said that my style is very much similar to Jane Austen sometimes, which I thought was incredibly flattering, actually, because of how she writes her poetry. But ultimately, that's how the Kind Coup was formed, because we decided that we were going to go for it. We were going to try to form something together and say, well, let's have a mashup between our two distinct styles. My found poetry, because I write a lot of freeform poetry as well. I've got collections of freeform poetry, but found poetry is my passion right now. And to be honest, as I say, I could just be doing this for the rest of my life. I'd be happy. And that's how we came up with the idea that saying, why don't we make something that's syllable based, like the haiku, but also you have the flexibility. So again, we're flexible. We're trying to say, look, because you might have a piece of writing that's very short, and I think that I found that when I tried to write found poetry on short poems, if you're working with a very small piece of writing, like a very short poem, it can't work. But the brilliance of a Kind Coup poem is that you can have a very short poem, but because you're only picking 7 words and you're building up the rest of it yourself, then you can find inspiration in even kind of sort of very, very short poems. Maybe not so much haikus, because haikus are incredibly short themselves, but any sort of short poems that people might write. I like Emily Dickinson, for example, and I couldn't write any found poetry based on her poetry until I started looking at Kind Coups, because her poems were incredibly short. They were usually only a few lines long, but because of the structure of the Kind Coup, and I find it a wonderful form, because it's basically you can't do anything negative with it. That's not the point of the Kind Coup. You could write a negative Kind Coup, and we wouldn't consider it to be a Kind Coup. And because we've created the form as well, because we're encouraging people to participate in the form, we say, well, why don't you write some, and then we'll feature them in our magazine if we believe them to be a true Kind Coup and truly positive. And we have had people that have submitted and done that, and I just think, well, that's really wonderful to see people have actually decided to do that, because some people look at it and think, oh, it looks too complicated. I don't want to give that a go. And you could say that about anything in life. It's just like, I think people relish the challenge, and once they see past the fact that it's not difficult, you've just got to do your research to find what inspires you, and then just follow the rules. We've got the rules on our website on how to do it, and then they create something wonderful, and it's just so marvelous to see them create something that we know is going to be positive. They've created something positive, and all we've done is just give them the spark, the creativity to do that. It's entirely up to them how they want to let the poem sort of unfold.
Okay. When you said found poetry, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what we were going to get into. I never heard that terminology before, but I actually do have a book of blackout poetry that, like, the book is just there. It's like different. Yeah. It's different texts that you're supposed to take your marker and mark it out, and then so that's really awesome. I really enjoy that book that I have, that, and creating the blackout poetry where I'm trying to find words to tell this. Usually my poems or anything I do is something that tells a story generally. I mean, that's just kind of the way I lean, but yeah, it's fun to try to look at what you're looking at and tell a different story than what is in front of you. So that's awesome. I like that.
That's exactly what I try to do, because I find that if you're doing blackout poetry or found poetry or any of that sort of stuff, is that the goal is to try to write something different, because otherwise I feel like it's plagiarism. I feel like if you're going to do something, sometimes somebody's got something that's so short, you can't help but lift a large portion of the line. But if you can find a way to position it in a different sort of way, then that, I think, makes it completely original. I mean, someone that I know, who I was chatting to on Facebook once, said to me that he does what he calls it cento poetry, cut up sort of poetry, and he'll take lines from other people's poems, just one line at a time, because with the whole plagiarism thing, you're allowed to take one line, and if it's any more than that. And he was then pasting those lines together. He was coming up with these incredible poems, because he had all these different lines with different places. And I like how people are taking inspiration from these artists and other people, and saying, look, I'm taking a little bit of something here and there, and I'm actually creating a whole brand new recipe and a brand new form themselves. And the more that they do of it, the more they get more confident to do it, and then you see these things evolve into something spectacular. And I started off just sort of dabbling in the found poetry thing, but as I say, not a lot of people have heard of, like you say, have heard of found poetry. But then you mentioned blackout poetry.
Yeah.
But virtual magnetic poetry is another one where you get a word jumble or a word cloud, and you look at that, and sometimes I would list all the words in a Word document, and then I'd come along and then I'd gradually pick them out. But sometimes it's fun just to sort of stare at the word cloud itself and just say, okay, these two words are together, I'll put these two words together, and so on. You can build something out of it. And I just, it's exhilarating to build something out of that, and just think, I wonder what the original text was, because sometimes you aren't told what the original text was that they took all those words from. But it becomes, and they try to also say, don't add any extra words as well if you can. If you can't make it sort of make sense, then, and I have I've been so militant with my rules. It's like I'll be like, no, I'm going to do it the way it comes out and the way I sort of see it. And then every so often I'm kind of just be like, well, I'll make that a plural, or I'll tweak that ever so slightly because it makes the poem a bit better to read. Because otherwise I end up in a situation where I reread some of my poetry and just think, I was following the rules a bit too carefully there.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find that if I follow it where the chips lie, like if I go through a poem and do it exactly where everything lies, I've had situations where I've broken my rule very, very recently, because I just felt I don't want to be forced to just use these words. Just one time I actually went through the entire document twice. So I took initially what I found, but then I started trying to read between the lines and take some out of that. So it didn't quite come out the way I usually do my found poetry. And most of the time, as I say, I will start from the beginning to end, and I won't move things around. I won't change them. Let's just be where the words lie, because that's interesting to me, because of how I'm forced to actually say things that I wouldn't normally say in my own poetry, because it becomes unique because I'm forced to use that word choice. And sometimes I think Cendrine's read it in some of my poetry and just said, hang on, does that make sense in terms of, and I've had to take liberties with the odd bit of grammar or that kind of sort of thing. But to me, it's kind of just like, if I feel like it makes sense and people can get that meaning out of it, then that's how I'll do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like a puzzle. It's like you're looking at it. It's more than just writing poetry. It's like writing poetry while trying to figure out the puzzle of the words in front of you. I like that. It's putting it together. So you both are multi-genre authors. What's some of your favorite works
Of ours?
Yeah.
You're asking us to choose between our babies. My God. Wow. Honestly, I cannot answer this question. It's really, really too hard, because it depends on my mood. It depends on so many different things, and my style has changed over the years. It's like, I don't know. It's too hard. I think right now, I'm going to answer right now. It's our latest book, really, Rhythm Flourishing, a collection of kainku and sisku. This is my favorite right now, because it's such a unique, it's a new kind of book. If you think about it, it's multimedia, it's photography, because the sisku is, as I said, poetry and photography, and there's our kainku as well. David and I have such different styles, very, very different styles in the way we write things. We're all positive, inspirational poets, but we write very differently. If I were to read one of David's poems without seeing his name, I would be able to recognize him. His style is very unique. And it's a compliment, by the way. And my style is unique. People have been able to recognize my style, because they know it over the years. But at the same time, our styles have evolved over the years. What David used to write has changed, and mine has changed as well. So really, this would be my favorite right now, because it's such a unique concept, something I've not seen before. And that's what I really love about our business partnership with David, is that we're able to, our ideas are not new, because I believe that all the ideas in the world have been used. Like, there's no novel idea per se, but we have been able to tweak things to make them our own, which is to me the definition of art. And I'm very, very proud of this book that we've released, because it's, as I said, it's very unique. It's something that you probably haven't seen before in the way it's presented. And in the book, we explain what the Sisku and the Kainku are. So we just don't throw the Kainku and the Sisku at people hoping that they will say, well, that's nice. No, we explain the rules, we explain how those forms work and how they can submit to us to potential feature in our magazines. It's not just us, showing off. It's just a way for us to motivate people to sit and start writing, or maybe take photos, and be creative. And to rebound on what you were saying, David, I think it's very important for anyone. You don't have to consider yourself creative to be an artist per se. It's important for people to challenge themselves, to get out of their comfort zones, not every day, but as frequently as possible, because many people lack passion in life. So that's why they feel trapped right now, especially with the pandemic. They feel trapped, depressed, alone, isolated. But I see, for me and David, when pandemic hit, we said, we're going to work hard. We're not going to talk about it. We're just going to work hard and bury our heads into work and to creativity and to creating things that change the status quo. And at least for me, has worked wonders, because I'm not thinking about anything but creating. I'm so happy. I'm in such a happy place. So unlike so many people who feel depressed and isolated, I feel so happy. And I wake up in the morning, I'm like, well, I'm going to work with David. We're going to work on the platform. I'm going to write. I'm going to take my photos. I've started doing digital art as well very recently. And all this has made me such a happy person. I'm so happy to be alive right now, which is weird, right? Considering the times we're living in. But that's what it is. I think it's very important, even if at the end of the day, you don't want to call yourself an artist, it's important to find what really makes you tick, to find your passion and say, I'm going to challenge myself today. This is my challenge for the day. And that's what we wanted to do with the Kainku and the Sisku, is really challenge people to do something, inspire them to sit down and say, well, maybe I'm not going to be a poet, but I'm going to give it a try and see if I like it. So that's why I'm very proud of this project that David and I have released.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear. I can tell how proud of it you are.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. David, what's some of your favorite works of your own?
Again, it's difficult to choose in terms of how I feel about my babies. What I really kind of like is that how we're kind of so we're inspirational when we write inspirational poetry. I write romantic poetry that I try to be inspirational as well. That's another facet that I do. But I'm very much a comedian as well. I used to write a lot of comedy lyrics when I was doing my comedy kind of sort of songs. And what I wanted to bring up was that I seem to have kind of rubbed off a bit on Cendrine, because I had a parody that I created. It's one of my favourite things. It's called 50 Shapes of Cakes, 50 Shades bakery parody. And it started off as a load of tweets that I was trying to write, and I was trying to spoof 50 Shades of Grey at the time, and then it became the phenomenon, and everything was going on. Like, I never really got it off the ground. I had some interest from newspapers and things that were enjoying my sense of humour, but for me, it was kind of it was me making a mockery of the erotica genre, and seeing how far I could take the words and things, and taking it down one particular route, and then people just going like, "Oh my God, this is so naughty." But then it ultimately, so it's almost like turning erotica into a PG kind of sort of thing, parental guidance, kind of like a PG-13 kind of sort of thing. And that was really funny to me. That's why it's one of my proudest moments, because I've taken something that is kind of sort of a naughty 18 plus, genre like erotica. And I've got a lot of respect for it. When people can write the romantic sort of stuff and make it saucy and make it kind of turning people on, I just think that's brilliant when they can do that. But I always kind of come across things, I just can't help but try to do some sort of spoof or parody or something. It's kind of part of my parcel. As I say, I write a lot of inspirational things. I write a lot of serious things. But I feel like as a comedian, as well, is that, you have a lot of comedians that will do some serious things, but they still can't deny their comedy side. And because of that, I think Cendrine was inspired to write her own little comedy book as well, not based on 50 Shades of Grey, but it was based upon spam emails that she was getting all the time. So she was being sarcastic about those as well. But I mean, a lot of my comedy poetry, because I have got some, outside of my found poetry, I've got 3 poetry collections that I wrote. And the first, my debut one, and the third one do contain comedic poems, usually kind of self-deprecating sort of poems. And a lot of them were heavily inspired by the band Electric Six. I don't know if you know the band Electric Six. They had hits with Gay Bar and Fire in the Disco and all these other kind of sort of silly ones. They've been churning out albums every year since they were around. They used to be called the Wild Bunch, but they're an American kind of band that they basically had a guy called Serge Jobot. I think they said he sounded like a RoboCop villain. But I was so heavily inspired by them because the frontman, is completely bonkers. He is very, very funny. It's just like in interviews, in everywhere. It's just everything that he does. His lyrics, they say basically like 90% or 95% don't mean anything at all. And that's what I love about it, because, you read his lyrics and you just think there must be something in these lyrics. There must be something there. But a lot of the time there'll be throwaway lines. As I say, every one of his songs is just like, it's incredible really, because they're kind of like this kind of secret that's been sort of kept for years. You just think, I've not heard of this band, but I actually got to see them in my hometown many years ago, before they were as big as they are now. But he's just, his work ethic really kind of impresses me. And the fact that, as I say, I mean, a lot of my comedy poetry was heavily influenced by him, by Weird Al Yankovic, who I really kind of rate as well. I think he's amazing. And so from that side of things, that's what I'd like to focus on, is that I'm very proud of what I've done with Cendrine, and I'm incredibly proud of all my serious sort of stuff, but I'm also very happy to have that kind of facet to my character as well, where I've got the comedic side as well. Sometimes I get into a load of silliness with a poem. It'll be completely and utterly bonkers. I don't know whether people will look at it and then just think, is that really him? Because it's not me, because some of the things are just completely and utterly impossible. They're ridiculous scenarios and things. But that to me is kind of just like, I like being an artist that can kind of explore all those sort of areas. I don't like being sort of, we've repeated the point so many times about being boxed in.
Yeah.
And that's what's so much fun to me, is to, I feel like it's kind of like the phrase sort of cutting loose. Sometimes, as I say, when you go in with an inspirational poem or romantic poem, you just think those are the things I've got to hit. But when you write a comedic poem, you just think, okay, all bets are off. Let's write something that is incredibly silly or funny. Because humour, I think, is a very difficult thing. Is that an artist that I like, Mike Patton from Faith No More, he used to always say about when you do humour, and a lot of his stuff is very humorous, but some of his stuff is serious as well. He tends to say you're taking a left turn when you do humour. But I think the ultimate problem with it is that it's like what some person might find funny, other people might not find funny. So what I try to do is I try to be like a Steve Martin sort of comedian, where I'll make people fill in the gaps themselves. Like I'll put out non sequiturs and just try and get them to make the link. There'll be a jump, and some people won't get it, but sometimes because of the absurdity of the situation, or just the fact that they've got to create the link themselves. It just means that, I mean, when I wrote my 50 Shades of Grey 50 Shades of Grey parody, it was just based around Twitter, but it made me a very good editor, because you had to edit everything down to the character limit at the time. So you had to make your puns and jokes razor sharp, and come up with different ones every time. I don't know whether I'll write another one after that, because I wrote about 100 tweets, or maybe even more than that, and then I whittled them down to the best ones that I've created. But that's what I'm particularly proud of, is that it forced me to really think hard about how I'm going to, just like when you write haikus, you've got to really heavily edit them and make sure that every single word counts, and and that's what I do now. I try to make sure that every single thing counts, and I write a lot of very short poetry. I'd like to write longer poetry. I do that with found poetry. If I, for example, find a 30-page Walt Whitman poem, or a 100-page thing, I might then come along and I might be able to get 100 lines out of that. But a lot of the time, my poetry is kind of sort of short and focused and sharp, and that's what I've always been proud of, my sense of humour, and turning something into a funny sort of situation, just again to inspire people and to make people happy. I tend to share a lot of animal pictures and animal humour on my on my Facebook feed as well, as a personal kind of sort of thing. But and that's what I'm most proud of as well, because I've had a lot of people coming to me saying that they're really kind of happy that I would do that and wouldn't focus on things like politics or other kind of sort of things. I just don't try, and I know which way I lean in terms of politics, and I'm not going to ruin people's days. I tend to put a lot of kind of feminist sort of issues on my page, but also mostly about animals and things, and that's what I'm most proud of when it comes to my writing and my my promotional kind of sort of career as a writer and a performer as well, really. So
absolutely. So as I was glancing through both of you guys' works and just kind of seeing what you've done, I see a lot of like between both of you, like workbooks, help books, guides, stuff like that, self-help type stuff. So before we get into the show, is there any advice that you guys could give out to young creators, young artists, young people, or not even just young, just people that want to, any advice to anybody, I guess? Whoever wants to go first. You're muted. Your mic is muted.
she doesn't notice. Maybe I should be going first. Your mic's muted, Cendrine. I think she might work out in a minute.
I can't unmute the.
Okay, I muted myself. I forgot.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I would say have a healthy level of self-confidence in the sense that you must take your work seriously. Stop telling the world that you're not good enough, because people are going to treat your work and you the way you treat yourself. So treat yourself with the respect you think you deserve. So take your work seriously in that sense. Present yourself professionally. Learn, do your research, ask questions. It's really what it's all about, because at the end of the day, the only way to be taken seriously is to take yourself seriously. So I'm not saying do not have a huge ego. Pay attention to your ego, but treat your work with the respect you think it deserves. It's really an important thing. And we were talking about that when we're talking about submissions for a platform. And as David was saying, I would say almost 100% sure when we see a submission, we know if we're going to say yes or no. Maybe not 100%, but I would say 9 times out of 10, I'm like, yeah, this is not going to work. This person, I know it for sure, because there's something in it. And it has nothing to do with talent, because talent is maybe 5% of your success. But if you don't work hard for it, no amount of talent will take you anywhere. So even if you think you're not good enough, don't say it. Just project a healthy level of self-confidence. And no one forces you to share everything with the world either. Just share what you're comfortable sharing. And when you share, do it professionally and with a healthy level of self-confidence.
Wise words. I mean, I would say myself that you always want to try to strive to, if you've got peers, if you say to yourself, I would love to write poetry like a particular person, you need to find your creative voice. And the only way you're going to find your creative voice is by drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, I've got to create something. And the first thing that you end up writing or creating, it might not be good, but then you've got to say, well, I've got to do that many more times. That's why you can edit. As Cendrine said, you don't have to share it with everybody on the planet. But the funniest thing is that if you start becoming fearless and saying, well, I'm going to share these things, what you'll do is you'll get feedback from people. And the vast majority of people will give you positive feedback. If you get any negative feedback, you want to say, well, you want to qualify that feedback and say, well, okay, is this relevant? You know, is it really that bad? Because if they're attacking it because they don't understand it, then that's not good feedback at all. But if they're coming along and saying, look, if you did it that way, and then you think to yourself and say, actually, if I did do it like that, you might be upset and frustrated to begin with. But I think that once you take someone's sort of constructive feedback and say, okay, maybe if I did do it that way, that does actually work better. That works for me. If you tried what they said and it doesn't work in your mind, you just think, no, that they're wrong. If you know in your heart that they're wrong, then don't listen to what they say. Just say, okay, thank you very much for the feedback, appreciate it, and then just move on. Because I feel like feedback is, you take the aspects, the positive aspects that they must have liked something about it if they're a kind person, but maybe they'll come along and they'll say, okay, that line would have been better there or moved around here or there. well, give it a try, see what it's like. If you really don't think that works, read it out aloud. If you really don't think it works, and then with art, as I say, it's a little bit more different because I think it's far more difficult for people to criticize something that's being created. But a lot of the time, when there is criticism and it's negative criticism, it's just pure jealousy because someone will come along, and if they're immediately negative about it, they either don't understand the thing or they're just upset that they couldn't create something like that. You're not going to be perfect on everything, but I feel like if you keep practicing and practicing, and you've got to try and nail your creative voice, so it might be that you'll keep doing something, and then eventually you'll say, well, this is what sounds more authentic to me. You want something that feels sort of true. I write a lot of poetry, as I say, a lot of found poetry that kind of still uses my authentic voice, even though I'm using other people's words. And I think that's a big distinction. I do find it difficult to try to write other people's kind of sort of points of view, but that's because I want to be my true authentic self.
Yeah.
And so yeah, my advice to people is to try to be your true authentic self, and to be a bit fearless, to try and put yourself out there. Because I had people that I would read people's poems on blogs and things, and I would just say, oh my God, I wish I could be as good as them. And then I would start diligently writing poetry, and I'd start trying to write every day. I feel like if you develop an artistic habit or a writing habit where you write every day, you might not be able to do it every single day, but trust me, if you could do it 6 days a week and take a Sunday off, you'll find that because you're doing it so much, you're putting the practice in. And I started getting feedback from people who were my peers, and they were saying to me, originally I was saying like, oh, I wish I could write like them. Then I was putting a lot of poetry out there, and then sometimes I would comment on other people's stuff, and I think it's very important that you try to give positive feedback to other people. You don't have to be critical. You could just say, well, I like that, or explain why you liked a particular line or piece. And these same people coming back to me saying, wow, that's amazing, getting praise from you of my poetry. And I'm kind of just like, and I was at the time, I was just like, what are you talking about? And they were just saying like, because you write poetry so well, that to get praise from you, that's just amazing. And I just thought, hang on a minute, that's where I realised that was where the switch had come, because I'd been practicing enough, and because I'd kind of tried to write to a level. I'm not trying to copy people. I'm trying to write at a level saying, look, these people could write at that level. I could do that too if I do enough research, enough practice. Then I can become as big as that particular person. And it's not a case of arrogance or ego or anything like that. It's a case of practice makes perfect. And once you're at that level, you can feel on their level and think, well, trying to bring other people up to my level. You want to become a light that someone else can just say, actually, he writes so well that I want to try and write, be inspired to write like he does. But you would hope that, because most people when they try to copy something, it comes out in their own way. And that's the thing. Don't be afraid to copy people. But if you're going to write, I don't think you should directly copy people. I think you try to adapt their particular style. Now, some people might try and write like Edgar Allan Poe, and it won't work for them. In which case, you say, well, then try and write like Shakespeare. Try and write like some of the other classic people. Try and write like the Romantic poets. And I've got a kinship for the Romantic poets, the 1800s and 1900s, and that's where my kind of sort of desires lie, because I try to imitate some of the stuff that they do, and it comes out in my own particular way, and that's why it becomes original, because I'm turn into those things. So that would be my advice, would be to make your research and sources very broad. Try to read beyond your comfort zone, and don't force yourself to read things that you utterly hate, but try different things out, and just say, okay, maybe if I try out some new things, if I know I don't like them, and I know I don't need to read all the Romantic poets, I can read a few Romantic poets. If I don't like them, then don't bother with them. Read the contemporary poets of the times. But I think you need to kind of find your path. You need to find a way, and it could take a long time. I said, as for me, I feel like I started writing my music lyrics in my 20s, and it's taken me 20 years to suddenly just go, aha, found poetry. That's me for the rest of my life, and I could basically do a James Patterson and get 20 other people to write the books for me as well, and put it under my brand, and then all of a sudden, I would probably be able to get through everything. I probably still wouldn't be able to, but at the same time, that's my kind of clear sort of advice. As I say, find your creative voice, do your research. Don't be afraid to delve into different time periods, different people's works, and above all, just try to remain kind of like, whenever you get kind of writer's block or creative kind of sort of block, don't blame yourself. Just think to yourself, what can you do to turn the situation around? Can you try to do some different kind of research? Can you try to write in a different way? Can you try to be more closer to your authentic self? And I think once you tap into that, I think that's when you're going to find and say, okay, I know who I am now. I know what I want to do, and that's how I can be an artist for the future.
Absolutely.
And if I may, I want to just add something.
Yeah.
When we artists, especially young artists, they tend to compare their styles to others and they're, oh, my style is not as good as you were saying, David. But I tend to say, compare your style compare your style to other people's style only to understand your own. That's very important, because we always compare ourselves to others. Like, we do it unconsciously, we don't always realize. But when you catch yourself doing it, just think about, well, why am I comparing myself? Is it because I feel self-conscious, or what is it? At the end of the day, just compare yourself to other people's styles because you want to understand your style better. That's really, really important. And when it comes to feedback as well, even if it's extremely negative, because it's social media and people are going to criticize because they feel entitled to open their mouth and say whatever they want to say. Do not take negative feedback personally. Just see it as someone reacting to your work, not to you. In 99% of cases, they're not attacking you. They're attacking what they're seeing on their screen, the words, the stories, the images, but it's not you. So do not take the criticism personally, because it's not personal. People do not react to that. They react to the energy behind the piece. So it's very important for you to take a step back and think, well, they don't like it. They're reacting to what they're seeing, not me. So it's not me. It's just a style that they may not relate to it. That's what it is. But by looking at it that way, it forces you to think about your style as being, different, unique, and so on and so forth. So it's really helpful not to take things personally as well.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Something else is kind of just to piggyback off that real quick is, in my experience, talent is subjective in a way that what I think is someone is talented, you may not believe that. You may think that they're not talented, and vice versa. There's not a hard and fast one way to do anything. And that's something that people need to realize is, if you bring something to me and I say I don't like it, that doesn't mean you're not talented. That means that you don't fit my interests. Like, it's not. But I'm one person in however many trillions of people there are. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want someone to feel like, I don't want people to feel like they can't come to me for criticism or feedback or whatever. That's fine. But I also don't want them to I don't want anybody to take my word as rule. You know what I mean? Like, this is it. If he doesn't like it, nobody will. Or if he does like it, everybody will. Because that's not true. If I like something, I might, the rest of the world might hate it. Who knows? Like, so really, at the end of the day, to kind of just like I said, kind of piggyback off of that is, if number one, in my opinion, should be, are you happy with it? I get that the fame and fortune and so on and so forth of everything else is great when that comes with it, all the recognition and everything and all that, but recognize yourself first is my advice, I guess. But do you guys have any real quick before I hit the song and we get out of here, you guys have any promotion or anything that you guys want to, Twitter pages, books, whatever you guys want to shout out real quick?
Okay, I'll let David talk.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we have our Power Up My Anthology that's available for pre-order. It's on a special price at the moment. I believe it's $5.99 instead of $8.99. So you've got to take advantage of that before the 3rd of November. So that's the thing. My most recent poetry collection myself is my Shakespeare collection, based on sonnets 1 to 50 of Shakespeare's sonnets. And that is called Appearing with Majesty. So that's my most recent poetry collection. We have the Rhythm Flourishing, which we mentioned earlier. That is our most recent collaboration, myself and Cendrine's. And we look imminently kind of on the cusp of going to release our creative journal as well. So we're still kind of sort of fine-tuning that and sorting out a cover and stuff like that. But we see ourselves getting that out before the end of the year, and possibly even a debut copy of our photography magazine as well. And we have our Power Art show on Saturday next week So not this Saturday, but next week will be the first kind of sort of launch of the brand new show, which is just the evolvement of the Poetry Matters show into the PrimeTime show. So I think that's pretty much covered most or all of our most recent things. But I don't know if somebody's got anything else to add in relation to our little excursions that we've got
I have
going.
so many things going on at the same time. So I one of my latest books is a photography book, which I released. It's another co-authoring job with my friend Isabel Nolasco, who's a fantastic Portuguese photographer. So we have a black and white book called Photography of Life and Living, the Black and White book, and there we mix photography of street photography, nature photography, in 5 different themes. Movement, stillness, growth, moments, and sharing. It's basically just us letting images speak for themselves. And Isabel and I actually co-founded F Point Collective, which is a partner of Auroras and Blossoms. There are 3 photographers in that collective. So we promote photography, and we are partners on the photography magazine as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming on. And for all the listeners out here, this was another episode of Prime Time with Travvy T. It was really fun. I enjoyed it. And you can check out more of our shows and everything with T1three Media at www.t1threemedia.com. So check us out. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.